How's it going, guys, and welcome to Formar Ranch. So as I continue my way down the list of different laser devices, I wanted to cover something that has not necessarily been released recently, but doesn't seem to get as much coverage on YouTube and in videos in general, and that is going to be the Holosun LE321 series. So this is kind of similar to their LS series, except that it is in a titanium housing instead of an aluminum housing. In addition to that, you not only have your IR laser, visible laser, and IR illuminator, it has a pretty usable white light paired with the unit as well. So in typical Formar Ranch fashion, in terms of how I like to test and evaluate these kind of laser units, we're going to go through a series of metrics that I tested it to include actual laser meterings, verification how well these are aligned, turret tracking tests. Of course, we're going to see how well it holds zero, and some other tests. So all that is in this video. There's a lot to cover, so check the description below. There will be timestamps for you to skip around, and also the video bar, the slider, should be partitioned if YouTube does its part to segment the video. So whatever you want to watch, that will be the quickest way to get to what you're interested in. Now, before we get any further, I do want to disclose that Holosun did send this unit my way so that I can put this video together. They started to see some of the laser content that I put together, and were interested in me sharing my thoughts and opinions with you guys on this. Now, I say opinions loosely because I'm going to use actual data, as I mentioned earlier in the intro, to cover this unit. So I like to rely on facts and not opinions on this channel. That being said, even though Holosun sent this my way, we're going to go over the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to this unit, and I won't hold back. I'm going to be as honest and unbiased as possible with you guys. Okay, so one thing I've liked to make a habit of when I'm trying to kind of vet these units and get a feel for their reliability is to see how well the laser diodes themselves are aligned, not only out of the box, but after putting some rounds down range, using it, banging it around. This is a metric to see, the attention to detail when assembling these things. Are they striving for perfection? Are they just slapping diodes into housings and calling it a day? So that's part of it. The other part is I want to see, do they hold up over time? Because if you have diodes shift, even if the Viz stays zeroed or the IR stays zeroed and the other is shifting, then technically you're not really holding zero, and you lose the convenience of having a slave laser because you're gonna have to pick between one or the other to be zeroed. But then again, in theory, if one is shifting, it's probably gonna keep shifting over time, and are you really holding zero then? So anyways, without diving into that further, here is the grouping right out of the box. This is taken at 10 yards. Now, if there was any offset, then 10 yards makes it easy for me to calculate what that offset is. So for example, if it was 0.1 inches over, 10 yards, 0.1 inches physical measurement would then correspond to 1 MOA, or 1 inch at 100 yards, be 2 inches at 200, so on and so forth. But you'll notice these are stacked right on top of each other. They're equidistant to the physical offset, vertical offset of the Holosun diodes, meaning they were perfectly aligned right out of the box. Now we checked again around the 500 round mark, and still perfectly aligned. And what I'm happy to present to you guys is that at 700 rounds, you'll see they are still perfectly stacked. Now, how did I collect this data? Like I said, I did it at 10 yards, but what I do is I mount this thing to a block. I mark the visible. I then switch to the IR, and then I switch back to the visible and make sure it's in the same point, so that I can verify that the unit itself didn't shift. As I'm twisting the dial on the back, it's not moving things and skewing my measurement, and this is a good reading. So all that to say, these diodes didn't shift at all. And one thing I want to point out is I intentionally got this unit hot to see if I could kind of loosen up any of the epoxy or potting, whatever they're using inside, to see if there would be a reliability issue in that scenario. And I'm happy to report that there was not an issue whatsoever. These things started rock solid and stayed rock solid. Okay, we're at over 300 on the handguard. Holosun is at, saw 139 for a second on the base. 33 on the very top, 107. So point being, heat is definitely soaked into this. We'll see if it shifts the diodes. Toasty setup. The next test I like to do, although it's not super scientific, it's still another metric of the quality or craftsmanship, quality of materials that they're putting inside these units, is a simple tracking test. So once again, I mount this to a block, the same block, I clamp it down to my workbench. From a short distance, I simply line up a target to where the laser diode is pointing. I then make 30 adjustments in the elevation, 30 in the windage, and then I go the opposite direction in the opposite order, windage and elevation again, just to see if the laser returns to the starting position after making the same number of adjustments. So why do I do this and why is it important? Well, once again, it's just another metric and another box to check to show what level of craftsmanship or quality of materials are being used inside of the turret mechanisms. Fortunately, this one returned perfectly back to 0, so there's no concerns to report on this metric. Now, I did take the time to go ahead and meter the output levels of the various modes on the meter, with the caveat that I don't currently have a viable or accurate way to measure lumen output of white light. So I will just let you know that Holosun advertises 100 lumens for the low and 300 lumens for the high visible white light mode. Now also keep in mind that the values I have displayed on the screen have been converted from the raw readout of my meter using 520 nanometers to convert that visible green laser and 830 nanometers for both of the IR laser and illuminator. So that is why you don't see the display on my meter measuring exactly what I'm reporting on the screen. Just know I properly converted these values for you, so you can take them with a reasonably high level of confidence. And of course, one major test is going to be how well this thing holds 0 at the range. And so what I do is I just simply get it zeroed. I mark a shooting position, I shoot a group, I then have a good time at the range, and then I verify if that group shifted with normal use. This was done for the 500 round count on this unit, and there were 0 issues to report. As expected, Holosun has a pretty good reputation for holding 0 with their products, and I can just say that this one also checked the box. I didn't have any issues with loss of 0. As a matter of fact, when taking this on and off with their quick detach mount and my tension set to a adequate tightness, it actually returns to 0 pretty well as well. So would you need to take it on and off for throwing it into your gun case or whatever, it does return to 0. Now, starting first on the visible spectrum, I want to point out that the 80-yard targets are very distinguishable, easy to identify. Obviously, the laser is more than adequate for nighttime aiming, but the range is actually 40 yards wide at this angle, and it has adequate flood, so you can clearly identify and see everything in that scenario. But rolling into the IR spectrum, which I'm sure many of you guys are curious about, I do want to point out that Holosun illuminators are very clean. You can see that shown here on the side of my shed at about 10 yards away. Very clean illuminators. Now let's go ahead and talk about how usable this illuminator is in actual practice. First, starting with a dark target. So there's no moon, no stars. You can see that the illuminator is very visible at 35 yards and it's doing its job. But now rolling into a scenario where there's a ton of ambient light, as you can see here, you notice that the illuminator doesn't really pack as much of a punch trying to get through those photonic barriers. Holosun D-Ball A3. Let's look at the 50-yard steel target with the t-shirt on. Gray t-shirt. Here's the Holosun. And here's the D-Ball A3. Holosun and D-Ball A3. So side-by-side comparison at 50 yards. D-Ball A3, Holosun on left. So because of the illuminator output levels on the civilian Holosun versions, it kind of leads me to label this as more of a PCC or PDW setup, especially since it has all the convenient features in a small package that would go on a small platform. It just kind of makes sense. Now, I would recommend that this is really only used for 150 yards in if you're really going to have to lean on the illuminator, but do keep in mind in a bright environment like what you're seeing right now, even without the illuminator giving you supplemental illumination, you can still identify the target, and in the complete dark scenarios, you do see the illuminator and it's doing its job more. Okay, so now that I've been using this for quite some time, I have just over 700 rounds to this unit. I've been using it quite a bit. It's been mounted to my Scorpion primarily. It's also been run on some 5.56. All that to say that this has been mounted for quite some time and a lot of range sessions so far to date. Now I'm gonna first start with the things that I really enjoyed, and then we'll talk about some of the shortcomings, and then I guess we'll end with some good notes again, because it feels kind of wrong to, end on a negative note. So first things first, when you hold a Holosun unit, and this even honestly goes for their LS line, they feel pretty solid. Now this thing is not necessarily overly lightweight. With the battery installed, it is 274 grams. So I mean, it's got some weight to it, but it feels really, really high quality. The turrets are nicely recessed. I don't see those breaking. The rear selector, or the divergence and convergence dial rather, although it protrudes, it seems really, really solid. And of all the lasers I've played with, the Holosun dial is actually the one I prefer the most. And if you haven't seen my huge comparison video, you'll know that just be aware I've played with a lot of different units, and the Holosun is actually the one that, in my personal preference, I like the most, because you feel the gears, it takes a good amount of force to move, so it's not gonna rotate on its own. I really enjoy it. The selector is pretty straightforward. All the low power modes are on top, high power is on bottom. I like how that's organized, so in the dark, where you're probably gonna be using this, it's easier and more intuitive to learn. They do also give you some LED indicators on the back. So I'll shade that a little bit. You can see that goes off based on if you have an IR illuminator or IR just pointer. So, if you happen to notice that light's on and you're not wearing night vision, then hey, I'm gonna drain my battery. So that's cool. Obviously the Viz options don't need that, because you can visibly see those. So that's nice. And the crane port is a huge win. So you're not stuck using something proprietary. All that's good. Although I personally don't think it's worth adding the extra weight to the gun. You can also power this unit with a USB with this connector right there, which, hey, again, I don't think it's necessary, but they're giving you options. Who doesn't like options? So now let's roll into something that I'd like to be improved, and then we'll go back to the best thing about this unit, so we can end on that good note. But I don't think it's a secret that the Holosun illuminators, at least their current generation, are not super bright. But I do want to kind of emphasize what is reasonable to expect. So in my opinion, I think that this is really best suited for like a PCC or a PDW, something that you're going to be using at closer ranges. And why is that? Well, because you have 4 devices in one, it'll save you a ton of real estate on an otherwise kind of limited platform where you don't have a ton of space to put multiple devices. So I've been running it on my Scorpion, which is a PCC, and I've really enjoyed it. It fits it perfect. I don't have to run extra lights. And again, there's limited rail space on the Scorpion or any short-barreled platform. So when you're using a PCC or PDW, and again, this is my thoughts and me trying to be practical on what to expect out of these. Realistically, the engagement ranges aren't going to be several hundred yards. It's probably going to be about 150 yards in, and this, for the most part, will illuminate things 150 yards in. Obviously, ambient conditions, light pollution in your environment will vary. The situation where you won't notice this illuminator as much is going to be when there's a ton of bright light outside. Maybe it's a super bright full moon. Then yeah, this illuminator, honestly, just being real with you guys, it's not super powerful. It doesn't punch through those photonic barriers too well. And based on my metering, that makes sense. I mean, we have only a 1.5 milliwatt output from this diode when it's converged, and basically point blank on my meter. That's what I got out of it, and visually what I'm seeing, it matches, it makes sense. So for those that are used to full power offerings like myself, then it may leave a little to be desired. And I'm just, again, being honest with you guys. That is the one thing that separates this from absolute perfection of a unit. But if you use it for something that makes sense to use it on, again, going back to the PCC or PDW, I think you can make it work, because in those situations where there's so much ambient light in your environment where you can't see the illuminator as well, I would expect that you can probably get positive identification on your target without the illuminator. The illuminator is still going to supplement, keep that in mind, but I was able to make this setup work just fine. And I know for a fact that there's a lot of people that have only had experience with Holosun units that have been very happy with them. It's not until they get a taste of full power units, which that's a whole nother category, comes with its own issues and challenges sometimes, or you're forced to go with a Chinese variation, which a lot of us don't really love having to do. Holosun, I acknowledge this is also made in China, but it's, you know, they have a strong US presence, a lot of US employees, and they're doing good things. So those are kind of my thoughts. I know I rambled a little bit about there, but I just wanted to point out my honest feedback on the Illuminator. And I think that is why so many people are excited for the Iris, because if the Iris has basically all the performance and the reliability that this does and the quality build, plus it has a more convenient way to converge and diverge the unit, and it's going to be a stronger output because of the visco technology that it's going to use, that's going to be a slam dunk, especially if Holosun prices it in the ballpark of what they do, their LE321 series. So I said I'd end on a good note, and the absolute best thing about this unit is that the lasers are not only perfectly aligned, the best that I've probably seen any unit I've tested to date. I mean, just absolutely perfectly parallel. The distance of these diodes is staying parallel at infinite distance. And not only did it start that way, but after 700 rounds, it stayed that way. And I got this thing hot. I mean, I did some mag dumps. I got it very, very warm, and it didn't loosen up or let any of their, whatever they're doing to hold those diodes in place, it didn't shift. So very, very impressed with that. Again, almost perfect unit. If the Illuminator was a little bit stronger, I think it'd be perfect, but otherwise, I have zero other things to harp on. This has been a very, very solid unit. It works really good on like a PCC or PDW setup. Is it gonna work great on, you know, a longer 300, 400 range setup? No, I think the Illuminator isn't gonna quite get you there, but otherwise, for 90% of what most people are gonna be using these things for at night, which is 100 yards and in, it's a pretty solid unit. So without rambling any further, I'm gonna end the video there. If there are any unanswered questions, please leave a comment. I try to be as responsive as possible. I'd be happy to shed any more insights on this thing. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. And as always, guys, have a good one.